And like me, do you appreciate the brand that it's going up against a name like the Black Bay, but not capitulating, rather staying true to themselves and the original shortcomings and oddities of the original piece from the 50s? Breitling offers some fantastic watches. I mean, you've clicked on this video. But it's one of the few enigmas in this hobby that the Breitling brand is not more popular on this platform. It's a shame, really. Dotted in between some of the major release headlines this year, a few of us might have missed out on the news that they dropped a thinner, smaller Heritage SuperOcean. And it got me thinking, now that the B31 caliber is well established, and that the brand seems to be a lot more independent in this category than they have been for a while, am I the only one that thinks that Breitling might be going after the superpower that is the Tudor Black Bay? Cliché enough of a title, yes, but Breitling and Tudor have always had quite an interesting relationship, one where the ties might be severed. We'll have to wait and see. Dive watches and the 1950s. A moment in history that I think most of us here would want to experience firsthand. Almost all of our beloved divers that we know of and recognize today, they originated here. And it was because of that competition, that push to be the best possible in your field, the best in the world, that we saw such an explosion of ideas, of concepts, and many failures. Now, with hindsight, many decades later, we can see which ones performed the best, which ones outlived the rest. And that wasn't supposed to rhyme, but you know what? I'm riffing here. Let's be honest, some of them objectively were just better. Now, maybe the best marketing machines in the world made it that way. Maybe advertising and demand dictated who succeeded and who failed. That is a tale as old as time. History is written by the loser, no, the victor. But the general rule of thumb always is that the simpler, the better. And in our watch world, there are always two very distinct categories. The one category where their designs look timeless, and the other category where, well, they look like they belong in the time when they were made. I hope that wasn't too complicated, but a timeless design is one that you can present to somebody and they wouldn't know whether it was made yesterday or, 100 years ago. Where a watch of its period, of the 50s, the 60s, the 80s, you can sort of raise your eyebrows and say, yeah, it definitely belongs there. I always bring Rolex into these conversations, but it's one of the easiest brands for us to understand. Why it remains universal is the fact that their designs have aged so gracefully, while across many other brands, only a handful of pieces, maybe one or two, have that timeless quality, while the rest seem like they belong in a time capsule. And I'm using examples like Breitling, like Omega, like Tudor in this case. The thing is though, 1950s watch design, it's one of my favorites. It truly is. Not because of the icons that we saw established at the time, but because it was so odd. Because these brands were willing to make mistakes. Because many of these concepts, they seem so bizarre today. Many of which they came across looking like prototypes. Dive watches without numbers on their bezels. Zero legibility. Highly reflective surfaces that make no sense. There was barely any thought about these things being made for a professional application. And because of that, they didn't have to adhere to ISO standards or very certain regulations about depth rating. So much of 1950s dive watch history, brands lied about the pieces that they made. There was zero transparency about where these brands sourced their dials, their movements, whether or not the watches were even waterproof. They didn't care, they just wanted them out of the door. And I really enjoy that. The developmental phase around watches, the many mistakes that were made along the way, and the designs which didn't make sense, it allows you to step back and ask, why was this done? What was the reason? So I would say I fall more into the camp of someone who appreciates a watch that is of its time. And especially through the early to mid 50s, seeing these pieces that make no logical sense to us today, it gets me going. It keeps me interested because I'm always questioning the mentality behind why they were made this way. Something that many of us forget here is that Breitlings claim to fame, they're a chronograph maker. They have no business in making a dive watch. Why they did it in the first place, it beats me. And I guess we can start right there and ask the question, did they actually truly make a successful dive watch in the first place? The SuperOcean name is genius. Breitling's naming structure has always been genius, as we will get into in a moment. But this collection of watches, they've gone through so many evolutions in their lifespan that most of us here are lost. But regardless, the creation of the SuperOcean dive watch in 1957, it's a gorgeous looking thing. Odd, space age, kinda alien, but still gorgeous. There are so many things wrong, head-scratching, incorrect about its dial design, the handset, the proportions, the bezel insert. But tell me where you can find a more aggressive-looking and a more charming-looking dive watch than this. And I guess I'm of that camp that appreciates it because it's almost entirely aesthetic-driven. Functionally driven? Nah, not really. But the model that was launched alongside the SuperOcean Diver, the SuperOcean Chronograph, now that is a real diving chronograph if I ever saw one. And I could be wrong in saying that this was the world's first, because who in their right mind would think, hey, let's put a chronograph underwater and see what happens? Breitling being the chronograph maker first, I like this approach, and we will see the same thing with the most recent diver. As I've said, Breitling has had so much success with naming their watches, the Navi Timer, the Chronomat, the Avigation, and the Top Time. I've got to critique this watch quickly. See, Breitling's modern direction with these watches, I don't know. I'm still questioning quite a few things. And that's including the SuperOcean we're talking about today. But I'm going to stick my neck out and speak for those of us out there who want the Breitling Top Time to be represented by the designs of the 1960s. These designs, bicompacts, tricompacts, Panda and reverse Panda, they should be everywhere. If priced and advertised correctly, it could compete with the likes of the Speedmaster. Maybe not in the popularity contests, but for us enthusiasts, it's a very nice piece. So we move on to the Breitling-Tudor partnership, which has been strong for the last, well over a decade. The rules of the game were very simple. Tudor would loan their Kenessi-based calibers to Breitling to fit to their time and date watches, where Breitling would lend their B31 movements over to Tudor to fit in all of their chronographs. It's quite fun to think that if you're wearing a chronograph from Tudor, you're actually wearing a Breitling, and if you're wearing a time only from Breitling, you're wearing a Tudor. Anyway, that rule has changed. In-house manufacturing across both of these brands has probably lessened the deal and the sharing of movements. The introduction of the smaller B31 caliber in the Top Time means that Breitling doesn't require Tudor's help anymore. And it also means that they can fit this movement into smaller sized pieces, which is what we are seeing. Now this is where it gets confusing, because the SuperOcean line, it has so many variations and generations. You have the Heritage 1, the Heritage 2, the Heritage 57, and then you have the standard SuperOcean, which is the more beefed up modern pieces. And I know I've lost you. It's far easier to put it under one banner. The SuperOcean Heritage has been a very popular choice over its lifespan. I think introduced originally in 2007, 42mm up to 44, maybe even 46. What defined this collection? Glossy, shiny surfaces, mesh bracelets, and we could call this watch a hybrid, an homage to the original from 1957. The Heritage 2 followed in a similar fashion, a few adjustments to the movement calibration, materials and colors, but the SuperOcean Heritage 57 arriving in 2020, I have a soft spot for this piece. A very near one-to-one callback to the original watch, but a lot of modern appointments too. Put it this way, all of the original components that made the 57 piece so charming and so peculiar, they're all here. From that dished ceramic bezel insert to the Christmas tree hour hand, to those, I don't even know what you would call them, funky quarter plots. Coupled with a mesh bracelet, you can see I'm a fan. I've always enjoyed coming back to look at it. So I think this was a smart move, launching the new watch in a smaller size, taking elements from both the Heritage 2 and the Heritage 57, putting it together, and we now have a watch that looks to be a blend of both. It's still a design that's polarizing, still one that's not seen as timeless, but of the time when it was made in the 1950s, and still unmistakably Breitling. And this is the thing, you have to appreciate a brand that stays true to its roots. There's nothing I loathe more than brands that feel they need to sell out in order to get more attention on them. You know, the integrated bracelet craze, which I'll talk about in a future video. Breitling still remains that brand that does not conform. And so we receive this new Heritage 40mm diver. And it's taken me a few weeks to come around to look at this watch. I'm not 100% sold on it for a few reasons, which I will share now with a design adjustment. But when you think about it in that way, that this watch is not compromising on its identity, I would say you have got to appreciate it. The unfortunate thing is that no matter how hard Breitling tries with a watch like this, and I think they've done exceptionally well, they will never be able to garner the same audience that the Black Bay has, purely because, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, timeless versus of the time. People will always gravitate towards the timeless designs first, and the Heritage collection will always be of the time. And this is what they are going for. This is their variation of a 1950s diver, where the Black Bay is Tudor's variation of a 1950s piece. But as far as being a competitive watch in this area, I think Breitling does a lot more. We can just talk about the aesthetic things first. Applied Breitling logo, lots of applied elements on the dial. Sunbrushed, we have a ceramic bezel insert. A great improvement on the mesh bracelet, the double deployant, it's one of the best in the business. And let's not forget also that it has a date window. It's a lot more practical on a daily basis. I guess there's that argument to be made that this is original, where the Black Bay is, technically a tribute watch to the Rolex Submariner. But I won't go down that road. I will say that this Breitling is a truly original watch belonging to the brand. And maybe not everything about this watch appeals to you. That also makes sense. 1950s designs, as I've already discussed, were incredibly divisive. So to close off in this video, if there was one change I would want to make to this watch, nothing serious. I know this piece is a lot more in line with the Heritage 1 and the Heritage 2, a collection that originally omitted the round markers on the dial. Now that this piece is both an amalgam of the Heritage and the Heritage 57, I would want to see that round marker on all of the quarter plots besides the 6 o'clock. Now this is something that you might disagree with. That center marker does help you locate the top of the dial very quickly. But I do believe that those markers were intended to be quarter markers. And to my eye, I just think it looks a bit better. But the chronograph, full marks. There is nothing about this watch that I want to change. Just like the original SuperOcean chronograph, seeing the date at the base is a very nice addition. The marker at the 12 o'clock and the sub-dials either end works. Now the thing is, there will be just as many complaints about this watch as there will be acknowledgements. Why have a dive watch without markers on the bezel? Why does it need to be so reflective, so highly polished? And I'll say this, my admiration for dive watches of the 1950s, especially the ones that did not win, that did not become as highly sought after and popular as others. There was something of a more formal, more old world, dressy quality about them. These were never made to be or to fall into any kind of standard to be a professional instrument. And likewise, I look at this Heritage 40mm and I don't see a professional dive watch. I instead look at a watch here that celebrates its past, that doesn't shy away from the fact that it never got everything right the first time. And now that we live in an age where watches are seen as jewelry and not functional tools anymore, maybe this is a clairvoyant way for brands to go. There are many things to enjoy about the Heritage Diver, and hey, if I didn't have an Omega of the same ilk, I'd probably go after one as well. What is it about this watch that you enjoy the most? What is it about it that speaks to you the best? And like me, do you appreciate the brand that it's going up against a name like the Black Bay, but not capitulating, rather staying true to themselves and the original shortcomings and oddities of the original piece from the 50s? Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.